give a bio on Peter, and Peter is not unknown to the KCOR people. He's friends with many in the group, and they also have meetings outside of the KCOR group. And Peter also has attended many of our lunches. I found that the bio was jam-packed, and if you met Peter and had time to talk to him, you would see that this is really shortchanging him. He's done an awful lot of work in many areas, and I just thought I would highlight some of the things that weren't in there. I think it's important to emphasize that he worked both publicly, for the public, and for private organizations. He's been our Canadian representative on the OECD in Paris for 5 years, and having to do with technology and communication. He also works on several boards, and one of the boards he works on, which I know a lot of people here use this as a internet server, is the National Capital Freenet. So this is one of the first nonprofit internet servers in Ottawa. So congratulations on that, Peter. And then he also does a lot of academic research, of course, and I think the most important one you did was the 6-year project you did on looking into Nortel, from business failure point of view, and with an interdisciplinary group of researchers. So that was quite important. And he also, which would probably be of interest to you, Ian, is that he's worked on health, and he's worked on telehealth and on telemedicine. So, and I think he worked on also a hospital and helping with hospital services. But I think the most important thing is if you ever get to be with him anywhere, and as Omer has pointed out, he is a wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure that we'll walk out of here knowing a lot more about AI. Thank you. You may or may not want to use.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Oh, good, you've got one of these. I'll try and shout. If there's anyone who can't hear me, please let me know, but I'm used to being in big lecture halls or not using a mic, so. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be able to talk to the Club of Rome, Ottawa, or the Canadian chapter of the Club of Rome, and in particular, as Madeleine was saying, I've been involved, in fact, before I even knew Madeleine, I was involved in the Club of Rome in the mid-'80s. For several years, and then I was moved away and left the country. So anyway, I've had a long relationship with the Club of Rome, but always at sort of an arm's length. What Madeleine didn't mention, although maybe it said something in this brief bio, is one of the reasons I'm giving this talk, is actually I'm one of the longtime people behind the commercialization of artificial intelligence. So just as a background, I've been involved in AI for more than 35 years, and have worked with some of the names that you might read about in various public fora. So the topic I'm going to talk about today is the rise and the foreseeable future of artificial intelligence. And somewhere in here I have it's over here, the slide changer. So here's the basic outline of the presentation, and I use a lot of information on my slides because I find that slides that hardly have anything on them, they're good talking points, but when you look at them later, you have no idea what was being said. So I put more information on the slide than I'm going to actually talk to you about. So I've color-coded some things, and I'll highlight the color coding. But this is the basic agenda, and I'm going to start off with artificial intelligence and geopolitics, because in fact, this is where the real rubber hits the road issues are happening right now in a variety of ways, which we'll explore. And we'll talk about suddenly AI. I mean, AI's been around for a long time. We'll see that shortly. I'll just outline where Canada is in this position, in the status of AI activity. We'll go in through a bit of history and the rise of AI, just to give you a context and the history behind it, because it actually goes back some time. And we'll examine it in the context of dual-use technologies, so and transformative technologies. So disruptive is what we often call them. And we'll look at the dual-use perspectives. Dual use in regard to AI means let's call it, I call it white and black. So the white would be like for societal good, and the black could be, well, could be military uses that are not necessarily black and evil, but are military uses or criminal uses, disrupting, as Stephen was saying, disrupting elections, for example, fake news. We'll talk a bit about these things in a few minutes. So that'll lead us right into the AI and ethics issue, and this is where I spend a lot of my time, is on dealing with ethics issues in this field. Also, we'll talk about AI wars, and what I mean by that, I don't mean it in the sense of kinetic warfare. The future of AI, we'll just cover a bit on that and end up with some general summary. If there's any burning clarification required, please interrupt. But if you have an elaboration or would like to introduce another point, we'll save that for the discussion. So let's look at AI and geopolitics. So if we think about the sweep of history, and this is a long time, since dawn of civilization, we really have had in my view, three major dominant phases to this way of looking at the sweep of history. The first phase, and it continues, is the control of land. And that was the result of the creation of empires and city-states and the way the world is today, in the sense of control of land, with private land and so on. But we've had that for about 6,000 years. More recently, we had the Industrial Revolution, and there was an elite that got control of the machine. And the elites in the previous past were the kings and the emperors and so forth. These were the barons of industry in the beginnings of the industrial age, and continue to this day. But we're now into a new kind of age, and that is of the use of information and data, and the power of all of that being used inside of computers in ways where we can mimic intelligent behavior. And this is really going to have some profound transformations, I believe, if AI continues. We'll get to the if part later. But this has only been around for roughly 50 years. So you can see the scaling. We're talking about things that are transforming society, and it's only been around for 50 years. And these are things that have been around for thousands of years. And of course, they did change society, and we've had real kinetic wars over that stuff. Okay, the journey also has this metaphorical component to it, and this is what's most interesting in today's world. In this first world of controlling the land, it was basically manual labor of man and animal. Then we got the machines to assist us. That took several thousand years from the beginning of that to the labor-saving devices, and we continue to have all kinds of labor-saving devices. In fact, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas last week, which is many of you may have followed or some follow, it was just riddled with AI. I mean, all these consumer products are coming out with AI embedded in them. So this is now labor-saving devices, like your talking personal assistants if you have Siri or those kind of things running around in your home. So we have now an ability to go towards cognitive tools for societal use. And when I say societal use, it could be the white stream or the black stream. Okay. Now, I'm now going to talk about the future of history, because we've just looked at the past, the sweep of history. And what I have here is, the machines of the Industrial Revolution were powerful engines. I mean, they created a whole transformation. We actually turned society upside down because of the invention, the diversity, and the control of the machine. And as a result, we changed our whole employment structure, the organization structures, the rise of the corporation, and all the things that go with that. AI is likely to have at least a similar impact as what happened at the beginning through the Industrial Revolution, or maybe even more, because this is moving into a much more flexible environment than simply the fixed machines that did things in that time. So, just as a quickie, I'm not going to go through these, just to point out, AI is on the lips of many of the world's leaders. And they're saying, in my view, the right things. I even found, allegedly, a quote from Donald Trump. His name was under it, and it was in quotations. I'm sure he didn't say it. Somebody more likely wrote it for him, but it's the right stuff. But the point is, Vladimir Putin is famous for a quote that I'm sure many of you have heard, and that is that whoever controls AI will control the world. Well, in that same speech, in the same sentence, or at least the same paragraph of that speech, he also said this: artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all of humankind. So that was Putin's other side of his comments about AI. We heard the press here saying about it, control the world. That's it. President Xi has also said some interesting things about AI. He's buried this in sort of the growth and development of Chinese infrastructure and business, and he's cast it there. You can read these things. Modi in India is very interesting. He puts an emphasis on employment, the future of work, in his comments. So Putin is typically something about the whole world. It's a benefit to the whole world. Xi is talking about its importance to transforming China. Modi's talking about it in terms of the future of work, both jobs lost and jobs gained. Donald Trump is expressing it in sort of typical Americanese about the upbeat kind of thing. Abe is putting it in the context of an aging society and how it will benefit Japan. Macron, interestingly, is talking about its ethics issues, about its politics, and how it will change perhaps democracy, which will be a part of the subject of that workshop that Steve spoke about. And even our own Prime Minister, which I must admit I was quite impressed. I watched him give a seminar at MIT AI Lab, and he knew what he was talking about. But this is a quote that he's made, and I'll get on to why he said that in a few minutes. But we are making massive investments in AI. Well, massive in the sense of what Canada can do. I mean, we're squirts compared to what the Chinese and Americans are doing. Theresa May, if she lasts beyond today, she actually has a really interesting insight about AI. She was asked a question, and this was her response, so it's in quotes. The greatest test of leadership for our time. In other words, deciding about the ethical and practical issues of the use of artificial intelligence. So those are some. Now we have suddenly AI in our face, so to speak. It's just suddenly been around. It's been around for a long time, but here we are. Mid-50s is when the term was coined, artificial intelligence. In fact, one of my colleagues in our Foresight Synergy Network at the University of Ottawa actually studied his PhD under the guy who coined the words artificial intelligence back in 1956. Since that time, AI has vacillated between periods of exploratory greatness. Things have happened and it's looking good, and their industry picking it up and going off and trying to make a buck with it, to then things fail in the progress because it got overpromised or underdelivered. And as a net result, there's a series of events in the last 50 years with respect to AI known as AI springs and AI winters. I was in the first AI spring, and the first AI winter came when I got seconded to the federal government to write a memorandum to cabinet on artificial intelligence. So that's the case. It's gone through this series of spring and winter, as opposed to summer and winter, because it always looks so promising. So up until now, up until the early 2000s. And now maybe we are moving into a summer. But I want to point out here, in this chart from PwC, I think, says there, Canada was the first country to announce a national AI policy. And this is produced by a group outside Canada. So they've ranked these in a sequential order based on timing. And you can see there's many countries here. China's there twice because of two major announcements in 2017. But you can see from this, and if you want to study the wording, you can see what it actually is, that there's many countries involved, and this is at the highest levels. I mean, these are where the cabinets or equivalents are involved in making decisions, because lots of money is being directed and policies changed, and even looking at using AI in government. And we can talk about that in maybe the question period about what's happening in the Canadian government. So here's just a quick summary of just some data. And I say recent, this is in the last, say, 5 years or less. So I tried these in alphabetical order. That's the only way they're ranked. But Canada has already got about, from the federal government alone, about $500 million in the last 3 years. And our private sector, which is both Canadian-based and foreign companies coming into Canada, because Canada has enormous reputation for AI research. And as a result, foreign companies are coming in. In fact, one company, Amazon, is spending over $100 million in their AI facility in Toronto. China is the big player today. The Chinese government has announced a formal program that's in excess of $7 billion US, and that is to run out to the next few years. but they have established a plan, they have put a stake in the ground that by 2030, they will be the world's leader in artificial intelligence. By 2020, they'll be on par with the major players of the world today, and in fact, they're already ahead of the United States in some components of AI. The European Union has committed a significant amount of money. So this is basically public money here. You can see in the case of Japan and the United Kingdom, I couldn't disaggregate the money in any meaningful way, so I just lumped them together, and these are public-private funds specifically for artificial intelligence. Mostly for artificial intelligence research. A small component is for artificial industry development, and another little even smaller component is for dealing with the ethics and the policy implications of this stuff. So let's just quickly comment on the rise of AI in China specifically. As I just said, the U.S. has been traditional leader, but about 18 months ago, China made this major announcement that I just outlined. It says global leader by 2030. That's what I think I said. China's AI startups received more funding than the U.S. last year, quite a bit more actually. In fact, here's an example of the $15.2 billion invested in AI startups. Last year, 2018, actually half of 2017, half of 2018, this was data that was collected in late 2018. There was 15.2 billion, and 48% of that went to startups in China. This is private money. This is not government money. And 36% went to the US. That's a fairly significant change, because only 3 years ago, China really was much lower. In fact, if you look at the scientific publications and the citations, which is a kind of a measure of the quality, China is now producing more papers in artificial intelligence than the United States. And India, surprisingly, is also producing a staggering amount of artificial intelligence research papers of high quality. So China now gleans more AI patents than the US and Japan combined. And those are two of the largest patent offices in the world. Actually, the Chinese patent office is now bigger than the US patent office in terms of number of patents dealt with. No, nothing. Well, Huawei's just one small player in this scale of stuff. No, it's the biggest telecommunications player, but it's a small player in the AI business so far. There are companies in China that are staggering, and you'll see a little bit here in a moment. In fact, this one, SenseTime. SenseTime was established just about 3 years ago. It's already got it's slightly over $4 billion valuation as a startup. And it specializes in, what do you think? You know, this China has a program about national, I forget the term. No, it's about monitoring and being a good citizen. So it's sort of a monitoring. There's several million cameras in China, like there is in the United Kingdom, not so many, but the sort of same kind of density. Anyway, SenseTime specializes in facial recognition. But the point is, they've got over 400 relationships with strategic partners in different parts of the world in these sorts of areas. So it was well beyond just the facial recognition for security reasons. Here is a source dated 2017 and PwC. They looked at the global forecast. PwC has done a number of country forecasts, so they've aggregated this, I guess, through grouping countries in this fashion. And they forecast out by 2030 that GDP gain, in other words, the added value to the world economy, will be about $15.7 trillion due to AI-related enablements. That's certainly questionable, and maybe some economists here might like to get into that at some point. Certainly we could drill down and get the original material. Now, there's also some views about AI, and I'm going to stress the public negative views, because those are the ones that really, I think, are the ones that are most disruptive to thinking about what this is all about, because you come with this sort of Terminator type view or Matrix view of the world of superintelligence. So it ranges from, massive impacts to loss of jobs. You probably all have heard of various forecasts that appear in the mainstream media that, in 10 to 20 years is going to be like 30% of retail workers will no longer have jobs. They'll be replaced by robots. It's not just at the low end, the high end of cognitive processes. Somebody mentioned, you mentioned here about diagnosis and medicine, applications to medicine. I had an interview. I interviewed as part of a work I did for the G7 ministers a few years ago. I interviewed the head of pathology at Oxford, and he actually was completely twisted, if I can put it in those terms. Here he is teaching pathology at a highly regarded institution, and he says, I'm teaching to students who are never going to really do this because machines are going to take over. And to a major extent, he's right in the sense that you're still going to need the human for some while, because we're going to talk about narrow AI. This is what we're really hearing about. I'll explain that in a minute. So anyway, we get all kinds of positive things, but there's negative things as well. So the job loss is one strong one. But perceptions of digital surveillance is certainly strong. And it seems that many people are starting to sort of give up a certain amount of privacy to share their Facebook pages or whatever with others. So there's all kinds of social implications starting to creep in just because of that activity. We also have the notion of the rise of superintelligence, and that's a notional rise only in the media and in storybooks and fiction. It's not in the lab. And so there's much more as well that deals with that. And there's also this public fear factor, just that it's sort of like radiation. You can't see it. We don't understand it as a lay citizen, so we better not agree to it, since we don't know what it is, that sort of thing. And so AI is going to be faced with some social pushback, in my view, and I think significant. We'll get to that. Continuing on this geopolitics thing, there's an enormous potential because of AI for disruption in the current model of governance. If you can imagine, if we had AI technology as you know about it, even just what you know already about it, and we had that in 1950, I think the Soviet Union would probably still be around, and it would probably have a very different structure than maybe it's aiming towards the one, or maybe China's aiming towards one that's maybe a more modern version of what would have been put up in 1950s. At the same time, we see how AI is being, and other forms of advanced information technology are being used to sway elections and therefore meddle in the process of democracy. So democracy is, under many perspectives, under a certain kind of threat, a different kind of threat than we've ever had since kinetic warfare, when particularly the Second World War being the last major one of that form, to the context of a threat to democracy. So, all this boils down to, we have things like, it's now getting almost impossible to discriminate fake news from real news through mimicking of people. So Canada has a number of activities. As I said, we were first to announce our strategy. Here are some examples. CFAR, the Canadian Foundation for Advanced Research, is got several institutions. This one's in Toronto, this one's in obviously Alberta, it's in Edmonton, and this one's in Montreal. They're all part of the CFAR family, which has gained money from the public purse, the federal government. And these are the elements of our strategy to increase. You can see they're all kind of the kind of things you would expect from a sort of a policy paper. To increase, to establish, to develop, to support. To enhance Canada's international profile, which we already, as I said, have a good one, primarily because of the academic activities at UBC, Alberta, Edmonton, U of T, and Montreal, particularly University de Montreal, but also several other institutions in those cities and elsewhere, including here in Ottawa and smaller places around the country. Increased collaboration on the geography basis. We have our superclusters, and there's an AI supercluster. That's one of the ones in Montreal. It sort of falls into that one. Attach and retain outstanding AI talent, etc. There's some institutes, and within that institute that I just outlined, they have 3 programs, and these are what they are. Basically, chairs for research, AI and society, looking at what's the implications of this stuff, and a program for building capacity and facilitating meetings and so forth. This is not meant to be seen other than it's cluttered. That's the point. This is a map AI companies in Canada produced as of less than 12 months old. There's over 500 companies on this thing. When I was in artificial intelligence, and I was a major dude in the area because I was interviewed all over the world, there were about 5 AI companies in Canada. I mean, this is just staggering compared to what it was when we went through the first wave. These are major areas of application: healthcare, automotive. Of course, this is a robotic car, right? I mean, a driverless car is simply a mobile robot. Financial services, and in transportation and logistics. So here we have a definition, a working definition. In fact, we have several, if you like. You can read them. I don't need to highlight them. But now we'll start talking a little bit about AI itself. As a bit of history, Jonathan Swift, way back in 1726, conjured in his book, Gulliver's Travels, something he called an engine for improving speculative knowledge by practical and mechanical operations. Sounds like he was describing at least a mechanical calculator, if not an early computer. And then Bayes, who is famous for Bayesian statistics, he reasoned that you could use probabilities of events in a way that you could therefore lead to an approach to what is now used in machine learning. And there's a company in Ottawa that is its base of activities is on Bayesian statistics, and it's one of the world leaders in fintech. And in particular, fintech is financial technology, and in particular in fraud detection. And Boole, you may remember George Boole, he's the guy who came up with if, then, when logic stuff. And he argued that you could make basically equations out of logic. So that's what he did. Nikola Tesla, who's often quoted for various things, he actually did this. He had the first radio-controlled vessel with a borrowed brain in it. That's what he called it. And that was in 1898. He was driving controlling a boat with a radio. And this New York-based firm had a radio-controlled driverless car on the streets of New York City in 1925. So, you know, the first of something often is way back. And then I put this in because it's very interesting. Just a few weeks ago, some announcement came out of Japan about a new robot that is so human-like, it's almost hard to tell it's not human. Well, I point out that it's in 1929 that in Japan they built the first robot that showed human facial expressions. And it goes on. So these are some of the scientific guys. You've probably heard of Alan Turing, the Turing test. Claude Shannon is famous for his information theory. These guys did different stuff, and here was the coining of that term, artificial intelligence. This guy won a Nobel Prize. He was not for AI and economics, but he was a major player in the field of artificial intelligence. And he was one of the guys who said, we will be, in 1965, I think it was, he said, we will have computers in 20 years that are like what we would like to see AI computers to be if we could have them on our desktop today. Well, clearly they didn't deliver. That's one of the reasons it went into another winter, because he was a big dude. So the 65, first technical writing on how to actually looking into the future about ultra intelligence. This was a truly scientific inquiry. First expert system, which is in the first phase of AI, developed at Stanford in the late mid-60s. And in fact, this guy Simon was involved, although he was at Carnegie Mellon. And of course, you all I'm sure know the HAL in film 2001. Anyone who doesn't know HAL? Well, that was a sentient computer. Yes, it's true. He just died too. But that was a really interesting science fiction rendition of a possible reality. Kuparek was quite the director. So let's draw some lessons. Basically, AI is likely to have a similar, if not more profound impact on all these things I've just said than the Industrial Revolution. So I go for that. So we're now down into the ethics issues in terms of, various things have happened. The leaders are saying things. Governments are putting money in. Companies are investing. Competition is heating up both between companies and countries. But meanwhile, the ethics, the efficacy, and the philosophical implications of AI are still in their infancy in terms of people who've gone into the field to become part of it, as well as having funding available to spend the time to cycle around and think about these issues. So what's driving AI technology development? Basically three things. Better algorithms, talk about that in a moment, increase in networking computers, like cloud computing, basically unbounded assets in that respect, and the ability to capture and store massive amounts of data. And so AI comes in three flavors. Here is where we get to the present and the future aspect of it. Narrow or weak AI it seeks to execute specialized tasks, not generalized tasks. It can't give a lecture one day and then go and repair a car the next day. And even the software that used to play Go or chess, which is beating humans at the top end, cannot go and drive a car. But we could do both, all three. We could play Go, we could play chess, we could drive the car. And give a lecture for that matter. But our AI stuff can't do that yet. That's general AI or strong AI. That's that stuff, when it's about like us. And then there's the artificial superintelligence, is what's the sci-fi stuff. So narrow or weak AI seeks to execute specialized tasks as compared to rudimentary state, and that's what I say is the rudimentary state of AI today. General AI is like us, or better. Superintelligence is way beyond, if we ever get there, way beyond intelligence of humans. So narrow AI is now. General AI, I think, will see significant progress before the end of the century. But these are all the developments are going up in nonlinear ways, and so it's possible that some major breakthroughs will happen, but there could be major failures too. I think superintelligence is well off in the distance, despite all this media hyperbole and as a science fiction. The three flavors all have research challenges, and this is what they are. And AI has hit the big times. But that is not the real big deal. The real big deal is what I was talking to you earlier about. It's how it's going to affect how we organize society, how we organize our organizations, how we organize government. I mean, it's going to have profound implications, not unlike the thinking about how the industrial age transformed the world. So as a disruptive technology, that's an example here of time, and call this the complexity and performance or whatever you want to put on the y-axis here. No matter what the product line or service is, at whatever quality, it tends to improve over time more or less linearly. Something that's disruptive goes right through them and through all of them. So AI is on this path in terms of as a technology. And these are examples of where it is already, at least at human level, very narrow rate regions, but to speech transcription, direct translation. I mean, nowadays when you translate, say with a Google Translate between Asian language and a European language, you don't make corrections in general. It's pretty good. So, in the interest of time, I'll proceed. AI will soon be a tool in these and many other fields. So, you heard about CRISPR recently. That's an acronym. It's for gene sequencing. AI is going to be applied to all of these kinds of things and more. These are the areas of study from a technical or academic point of view in regard to AI. And it include, of course, philosophy and psychology and neuroscience and neurology and biology. So all these things all meld together in a rather complex way. And here are some current commercial uses of AI. And, the advanced robotics is like the driverless car, and Ottawa is becoming a center of excellence for the auto industry globally in regard to certain aspects of entertainment systems and intelligent transportation systems with respect to automated cars. There are basically three areas that are driving AI at the current narrow AI. It's mining, it's the data. You have to train the systems with data. That the future AI, you won't have to do that. It'll self-learn. So you've got, you need mining of information. We need the big data. You need to be able to mine it. That we call data science. Is all this stuff that deals with data patterns and so on. This is the data itself. And then you've got things related to machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, and we call it machine learning or deep learning. Different words are used, but they mean the same thing. These are covered on the slides. And there's breakthroughs in narrow AI are today, and it's because of deep learning. And in fact, the breakthroughs in deep learning come from the University of Toronto, which has made itself world famous for this reason. Jeffrey Hinton at University of Toronto, who used to be an advisor to my AI company, is now one of the darlings of the AI industry worldwide. Deep learning comes in 5 flavors, and I'll show you those in a moment. I'm going to skip ahead here. These are the 5 flavors. Connectionists, who look from the point of view of how the brain, they think about the brain and the synapses and neurons. Evolutionists look at things on an evolutionary biology perspective. Bayesians are the people who do it with the stats. Symbolists are looking for a general purpose AI. So maybe this is like closest thing to at least the general AI, if not the super intelligent AI, but certainly general AI. And the analogizers are people who look at things from an analogy point of view. The only one that's making the big hit right now, and the biggest hit, is up here in the connectionist area. And that's all the cars and the facial recognition and all the different apps you hear about, including voice recognition and so forth. And Bayesian is being applied where there's some number stuff, particularly like in fintech. And in fact, here are some applications here and some uses over there. And I'd like to just point out that there are some different perspectives on the state of AI. This fellow is well known internationally, Nick Bostrom from Oxford. And I'll highlight this guy's a philosopher and a highly reputed university, and he's very involved in AI activities in a number of institutions around the world. He says, machine intelligence is the last invention that humanity will ever need to make. That's pretty bold. So here's in quick summary, even though we went back further in time than 1900, but we've had basically the tabulating era, then the programming era, and now we're moving into this cognitive era. So how are we doing for time? Another 5 minutes? Oh, that's it? Okay. Well, I can leave it at that, because that's a good end point, because I ended right there. But I do have some more material if you'd like, so it's up to you, management.
Is AI a danger?
Oh, all right, we'll do the AI as a danger, so that we may, the dual perspective. Well, I'd say it depends, and I use the metaphor of a match, right? Is a match dangerous? Well, if you want to set the house on fire, yes. If you need to light the cooking stove, no. So AI has yes and no issues associated with similar to that. So it's a philosophical question, and a meaningful one. But there are areas, there's reasons for concern that are both technical and socioeconomic. That AI may be pushed back in society, as I was hinting at, just like nuclear power is pushed back because people have fear of nuclear weapons. There's no relationship directly, and so it's an educational process as well as broader than that, a political process. So is AI dangerous? Well, there's this notion that it's got dual uses. So there's the two lines, if you like, the social good and therefore others for control of things like being criminal. So there are some efforts in the AI community, such as the similar AI principles, which set out a variety of ethical constraints on both research and areas around the research in AI. They set timeframes as well. I was one of the signatories to that particular document. Also, the reality is goals versus time and resources. Clearly, we see China is definitely trying to shorten the time and have as many resources as possible in their strive for AI. These are my personal views on the dual use side. I consider that there's 2 existential threats. One is autonomous weapons. That's where we actually empower kinetic devices to make decisions on their own to shoot and kill, with no human in the loop. I don't think that's human anymore. That's a slippery slope into something else. So I'm opposed to this, but my projection is it will be likely in the next 25 years. Superintelligence, beyond that. Growing threats, cybersecurity, these are all high. Cyber crime, cyber espionage, cyber warfare, and cyber threats to privacy, all very high. Now, the technology can also be used to try and constrain these. But at the same time, in some of these areas, the state is involved. But in other areas, there are individual actors and groups like terrorist groups, that could access such things and disrupt infrastructure, for example. It's very easy these days. I say easy in a general sense. My colleague Alan Vogt will agree to this, about how you can disrupt national infrastructure at a distance by using the internet to change the settings on things. So I guess we'll leave it at that for now.
People can maybe ask questions.
If there's questions, I can jump into maybe relevant
From what you
material.
said
Yeah.
before. So